Coming up on a newscast, President Yoon held his first televised emergency economic meeting. The cabinet and senior officials laid out comprehensive measures to revitalize the economy and improve people's lives. Lee Jae-yong is now the official chair of Samsung. He served as a de facto chief of the nation's biggest tech giant and is now approved by the board to officially succeed his late father in the leadership post. For the first time in 7 years, South Korea is sending ships to Japan's International Fleet Review. This comes amid sensitive public opinion, especially about the country's display of controversial Rising Sun flag during the event. Hello and welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with the top story at this hour. President Yoon chaired his regular economic affairs meeting, but the 80-minute-long session proved to be a departure from previous ones that were held behind closed doors for the most part. Moon Gun-young starts us off.
Nearly 24 South Korean ministers and top presidential office aides in an open roundtable with the president on live television, actively exchanging policy ideas on how to breathe life into the economy. Not a scene the Korean public is used to seeing at all. And spotted in this meeting not only officials in charge of business and economy, but President Yoon's national security advisor and his defense minister. South Korea's chief executive officer kicked off the session by explaining why the unconventional approach on this Thursday.
투자와 경제 활동이 위축된 가운데 활력을 불어넣기 위해서 정부가 어떤 정책을 가지고 있는지 또 계획을 수립해서 실천을 할지 궁금해하시는 분들이 많이 있습니다.
His finance minister set the tone of Mr. Yoon's 11th emergency meeting on economic affairs, but the first to be televised by laying out the reality.
South Korea's heavily export-dependent economy faces growing risks due to a mix of high interest rates, strengthening U.S. dollar, and skyrocketing inflation across the world. The slump in exports is expected to continue for the time being.
For the following 80 minutes, Yoon's ministers took turns proposing policy measures pertaining to their respective fields, largely in 5 areas. Betting hard on the nation's core industries, like a $700 million support for the chips industry, doubling down on defense and nuclear power plant export, and revamping overseas construction and easing financial restrictions on the housing sector, to cementing global leadership of the country's rechargeable battery manufacturers, K-contents, and the digital economy. Yoon weighed in throughout the discussion, calling for comprehensive measures on stabilizing supply chains and highlighting the close link between nuclear power plants, the defense industry, and national security.
이렇게 모든 부처가 그래서 전부 이런 국가 전략 산업을 하여튼 지원하고 촉진시킨다고 하는 이런 산업과 수출에 매진하는 이런 부서라는 생각을 가지고 우리가 일해야 되지 않겠습니까?
President Yoon, his cabinet and top aides concluded the meeting by seeing eye to eye that it is the government's job to come up with meticulous economic revitalization measures that would enable the private sector to compete on a level playing field. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News.
말씀하실 부분이 있으신가요?
Staying with the emergency meeting, Seoul will work to help local chip makers be global leaders. The Yoon administration plans to provide support to ensure Korea is one of the top 4 countries in the overseas construction industry. Also, the government seeks to ease some regulations on the local housing market. Ji-young has the details.
South Korea is shoring up one of the main drivers of its economy, the semiconductor industry. In Thursday's emergency meeting on economic affairs and people's livelihoods, President Yoon stressed that the government has been pushing to maintain South Korea's global leadership in chips despite the industry's recent difficulties. Supporting his pledge, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy cited past cases to say that the current down cycle could turn into an opportunity.
In the past, through extensive investment in the chip industry, we had great results during slowdowns. The government will provide active support for the roughly 340 trillion won that private firms are planning to invest.
The government also plans to spend about $700 million to train professionals in semiconductors and to establish infrastructure, and will sharply increase tax benefits. Forming the backbone of the country's chip industry are more than 1,000 small and medium-sized companies, and so to support them, the government is also going to set up a fund worth $200 million.
We are aiming to become the leader of the system chip industry. To achieve this, we need to nurture small fabless firms. The government will form a consultative group on fabless and foundry called One Team Korea to help ensure the industry maintains its global competitiveness.
The government will not only focus on semiconductors, but will also boost overseas construction. The Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport said that amid high global oil prices, demand for construction is rising in oil-rich countries.
We will aim to win $50 billion of overseas deals per year and become one of the top 4 countries in construction. Currently, Saudi Arabia is placing orders. These include $500 billion in deals for the NEOM New City project, and we are going to do all we can to win these.
And along with the growth in the industry abroad, there will be further support for construction at home. The government in November is going to lift regulations that restrict construction in certain areas, and with home prices having risen out of many people's reach, lay out measures to get more homes onto the market.
Until now, partial mortgage loans were provided for those buying properties worth up to 900 million won. But this is too low considering how much prices have risen. It will be raised to 1.2 billion won.
He added for those chosen in lotteries to buy and move into units in new housing projects, the deadline by which they have to sell their old house will be extended to 2 years, considering the slowdown in the property market. Also, for people who own just one home or are trying to buy their first one, they'll be able to borrow up to 50% of the assessed value of the home, up from the current 40%, even in areas highly regulated because of speculation. Mortgages will also be allowed for houses worth up to 1.5 billion won, or about $1 million. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Also, during the economic meeting, cabinet members touched on growth engines in various fields. These include arms sales, nuclear power exports, culture and tourism, as well as IT and science. Yoon Jung-min shares with us what was discussed.
Growth is not just bound up in exports or investments, but expands into various sectors like defense, nuclear power, culture, and health. South Korea's arms sales quadrupled this year compared to before to $13 billion, adding millions of jobs and creating a spillover effect. But efforts for further growth don't stop there.
The Defense Ministry is providing know-how and other training as well as arms sales, and by doing so, we are building trust in the K-defense industry so that it can lead to an expansion of exports.
Another key pillar of exports includes nuclear energy, as the country eyes contracts for nuclear power plant projects in the Czech Republic and Poland. President Yoon in response calls both nuclear power and the defense industry key to the security of a nation.
중동 지역과 유럽 지역에 원전과 방산 그 패키지 수출이 잘 이루어질 수 있도록 이거는 정부 모든 부처가 산업부, 국방부를 중심으로 해가지고 합심을 해야 된다고 생각합니다.
The Korean government is also seeking out sources of growth in culture and tourism in the wake of success in K-pop and K-dramas. The Culture Ministry plans to create a K-culture visa for young foreigners coming to South Korea to get involved in singing, acting, or other entertainment activities. The ministry also plans to provide $350 million worth of funding for the tourism industry.
There should be an active and realistic policy that combines Hallyu, K-culture, K-tourism, and IT.
Other major takeaways from Thursday's emergency meeting on economic affairs were injecting more state funds into artificial intelligence, data, biohealth, and vaccines. South Korea also set forth an ambitious goal of nurturing 100 startups in the space industry by 2030. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The South Korean economy grew at a faster pace than originally forecast in Q3. The central bank attributed the growth to increased private consumption as well as investments in semiconductors. Expansion was slower recently due to weak exports. Choi Min-jung helps us look beyond the digits.
South Korea's economy posted higher than expected growth in the third quarter of this year. The Bank of Korea revealed Thursday that the country's third quarter real GDP grew 0.3% on quarter. This is higher than the 0.1% increase originally forecast back in September. It also marks growth for the 9th consecutive quarter, following the economic contraction witnessed during the first 2 quarters of 2020 due to the outbreak of COVID-19. The central bank says private consumption played a big part in registering growth above what was originally forecast. Private consumption rose by 1.9% thanks to increased spending on durable goods like cars, as well as food and accommodation services. The growth was also pushed by a whopping 5% jump in facility investment, driven by increased investment in equipment for semiconductors and displays. However, the economy grew at a slower pace in Q3 compared to previous quarters due to trade deficits. Exports increased by just 1% in the third quarter following a decline in exports of semiconductors. Meanwhile, imports grew almost 6% on quarter.
Prices for imports have risen significantly higher than the price for exports. To summarize, our economy did grow in the third quarter thanks to an increase in consumption and investment, but it was slowed down by a big jump in imports.
The Bank of Korea had previously forecast the country's economy to grow by 2.6% this year. Now, with the higher than expected growth for Q3, the central bank indicated that the country could very likely achieve that target. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
After serving as a de facto chief of Korea's biggest conglomerate for a decade, Lee Jae-yong is approved by the Samsung board to officially succeed his late father as the new chairman. The tech giant reported third quarter earnings which were sharply down, mainly due to the chip sector struggles. Lee Jae-yong has the full story.
Lee Jae-yong of Samsung Electronics has been named as the company's chairman. The South Korean tech giant said that the board of directors endorsed Lee's step up from vice chairman to chairman on Thursday. Lee was appointed as vice chairman in 2012. Although approval from the company's board of directors wasn't needed, the chairmanship was ultimately decided based on the company's principle of board-based management.
This is a huge responsibility. I will work hard so that Samsung becomes a more trusted and loved brand. I hope we can count on your support.
Meanwhile, Samsung Electronics on Thursday posted an earnings shock for the third quarter of this year. The company reported that operating profit were down over 31% compared to a year earlier, badly missing market forecasts. Operating profits came in at around 10.8 trillion won, or about $7.6 billion. Despite the surprising figures, sales increased 3.7% on year in the third quarter to over 76 trillion won, or about $54.2 billion, an all-time high for Samsung for any third quarter. Net income, meanwhile, was down 23.6% on year. Analysts say the decline in the memory semiconductor sector was a big reason for the downturn. Profits from the company's chip business came to 5.1 trillion won, or around $3.6 billion. This is a sharp decline from the 10 trillion won, or $7.6 billion posted a year earlier. Other than chips, sales of smartphones saw a rise, largely driven by the release of new models and high $1 exchange rates. The display and home appliances sector, however, plunged as there was low demand for TVs due to the global economic slowdown. Meanwhile, some analysts say Samsung's fourth quarter earnings are expected to dip further as memory chip prices continue to fall. But the world's top maker of memory chips and smartphones forecasted that despite geopolitical uncertainties, demand for its semiconductors may recover later in 2023 as new data centers and computers require more memory. Lee Jae-yong, Arirang News.
For the first time in 7 years, South Korea is taking part in Japan's fleet review scheduled for early next month. However, some criticized the move as the flag used by the Japanese Navy is seen by many Koreans as highly offensive. Bae-eun-ji explains further.
South Korea has decided to send a 10,000-ton logistics support ship called Soyang to take part in Japan's fleet review, coming up on November 6th. The country's defense ministry made the announcement Thursday and said the decision was made based on the fact that the country's navy has participated in the event twice before, and considering the security situation on the Korean peninsula following a recent series of provocations from North Korea. This is the first time since 2015 that South Korea is taking part in the event, and officials say it took time for them to decide whether to do so this year, because the flag or ensign used by Japan's navy is almost identical to the flag of the former Japanese Imperial Army. It features the rising sun emblem, viewed by many South Koreans as a symbol of the Japanese colonial rule. The country made the decision at the last minute, months after the Japanese government invited South Korea to the event in January. In 2018, Japan decided not to take part in South Korea's fleet review as it rejected Seoul's request of not using the red and white flag on its warships. Following the review, the South Korean ship will be joining a multinational search and rescue exercise through November 7th. Also, the South Korean Navy's top officer, Admiral Lee Jong-ho, will take part in the Western Pacific Naval Symposium, along with top naval officers from around 30 different countries. This year's International Fleet Review, hosted by Japan, will mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force. 배은지, Arirang News.
Elsewhere around the world, Ukraine is bracing for the heaviest of battles in the war with Russia. That's according to a senior official who predicts fierce fighting for the partially Russian-occupied Kherson. The remark came as Moscow is reportedly gearing up to defend the region from an anticipated counteroffensive. In recent weeks, Ukrainian troops made inroads west of the Dnieper River. Control of Kherson is expected to determine whether Kyiv can loosen Moscow's grip on the south. Close to 160 children in Indonesia have died from acute kidney injury so far this year. The cause may involve tainted cough syrup. According to local health authorities Thursday, the country has reported 269 cases of atypical progressive acute kidney disease. Of the total number, 73 were still being treated, 157 have died, while 39 have recovered. The Indonesian government recently announced a ban on all syrups and liquid medicine, prescription and over-the-counter sales following the sudden spike in acute kidney injury cases. 300 victims of the Jeju April 3rd incident, a bloody suppression of a civilian protest in 1948 and 49, are to receive compensation from the Korean government. A total of nearly $18 million will be provided for this round. Individuals will get up to $63,000 depending on the level of injury. This also marks the first time that victims of state violence are compensated. Last year, the government decided to pay about $674 million to over 10,000 people, the largest state compensation for civilian victims of past tragedies. At next month's UN Climate Change Conference, the Global Green Growth Institute hosted an event to discuss the crisis and the green transformation. The institute is an intergovernmental organization that started off as an NGO in South Korea to help developing countries achieve sustainable growth. Kim Jong-sil went to one of the meetings to file this report.
This year's Global Green Growth Week kicked off this week. And celebrating its 10-year anniversary as an intergovernmental organization, ministers from the Global Green Growth Institute member countries visited its headquarters in Seoul for the first time since the pandemic and held a panel session to discuss some of the challenges they face.
One of the main concerns the ministers raised in this session was the climate crisis and the natural disasters it causes, like floods and droughts.
We experienced a drought lasting for almost 120 days, which I had never seen in my lifetime.
Ministers from Laos and Kazakhstan also spoke of their experiences of extreme weather-related disasters that resulted in substantial damage. Officials then discussed what steps would be necessary to take in the future in order to achieve sustainable growth, the very reason the GGGI was founded in the first place.
Developing countries, they want to protect environment, they want to reduce greenhouse gas emission, but at the same time, they want to achieve economic growth.
Addressing some of the toughest challenges in the world, GGGI President Ban Ki-moon said that geopolitical conflict between the U.S. and China, as well as Russian aggression in Ukraine, has disrupted global efforts to address environmental issues while also leading to economic and food crisis. However, he said it's important that the world comes together during this tough time.
We have only one planet. We don't have planet B. And thus, we don't have plan B either. We have put all our hands on the deck together. That has been my continuing message. We have no time to lose.
With COP27 just around the corner, the GGGI hopes this year's climate conference will be able to make a difference. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now. Gwangju, the musical, which depicts the story behind the May 18th democracy movement in the southwestern Korean city in 1980, has traveled across the globe. Most recently, it was showcased in New York and received a standing ovation. Kim Hyun-sung sheds light on the significance of the performance.
Spring in Gwangju 1980 was mired in bloodshed. Civilians stood together to rise against Chun Do-hwan's military regime. But the military violently suppressed the movement and killed hundreds of civilians. May 18, 1980 remains as a painful but important chapter in Korean history. Now in 2022, the story of what had happened in Gwangju is being sung in English on the other side of the globe. Gwangju the musical was first showcased in New York last Thursday local time. It's not a story about heroes, but one about ordinary people who bravely fight together for democracy. The show was first born in Seoul in 2020 as a 2.5-hour show. For the New York audience, it has been condensed to under an hour and has been adapted into English.
This show has resonance universally, that we are still in times where there is civil unrest and there's pain around the world. And music, theater have, life-changing qualities.
The cast of Gwangju the musical were also mostly Asian American. This has helped open up opportunities for Asian actors who often struggle to find protagonist roles in the Broadway scene.
Even in the city, there's a lot of diversity, but there really isn't like Asian stories that were being actively told, and I think it's really changing today. I don't know, I think I'm coming up in a really great time.
Nearly all of the 500 seats in the theater were filled. And according to one of the spectators, the show was met with a big round of applause.
It felt like a lot of the American audience members could really relate to the story. Some were shedding tears, some got up to clap. We were scared and nervous before the show, but there was such a heated response.
The New York show only gave a taste of Gwangju the musical to the audience. But if it fares well among audiences and investors, it could potentially break into Broadway, the mecca of musicals. Gwangju the musical still has many hurdles before that happens. But the president of the Gwangju Cultural Foundation says that last Thursday was only the start of Gwangju the musical's journey. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
The warming trend continues tomorrow with temperatures surpassing the seasonal norms. Highs in Seoul will hover around 19 degrees Celsius. Until tomorrow, morning lows will stay in single figures for most inland regions. Big fluctuation in daily temperatures are once again expected, so make sure to dress in layers. Some regions will even see overnight temperatures plummeting to sub-zero figures. For Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces in particular, frost and ice may even appear at times. In order to prevent frost and ice damage, sensitive vegetation will need to be covered. Due to the influence of cold easterly winds, showers will continue across eastern regions. Eastern Gangwon-do province will expect about 10 to 40 millimeters. Coastal regions of Gyeongsang-buk-do province will see 5 to 20. Morning lows in Seoul and Gwangju will be starting off at 9 degrees tomorrow. As for the daily highs, Chuncheon will reach 19, Gwangju 22, Daegu will be topping out at 21 degrees. Until Saturday, Gangwon-do province will see long spells of showers. For the capital region, dry and mild weather will continue into next week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.
Peace and Prosperity is back in a new format with its new host Kim Han-ul.